Welcome. Welcome to the Church of Perpetual Life. So glad that you are here, and everyone in YouTube and in Zoom is able to see us and be with us here as well in Pompano Beach, Florida. My name is Neil Vandery, and I am your officiator here tonight. And it's my pleasure to be guiding us as we go through the evening tonight. We have got some great events, some great speakers for this event tonight. First, I'd like to let you know about the flower sponsor. Every month we have someone to sponsor the flowers. Last month, I believe it was Debbie, and this month it's me. It's my turn to sponsor the flowers, and tonight we're celebrating my wife's birthday. Happy birthday to Paula. She's actually watching in Venice right now. But in my family, in January, after, you've got the holidays, you've got Christmas or Hanukkah, and you've got the New Year's, and you've got all the great celebrations in December, and then you hit January. But at my house, we continue to celebrate. We continue to celebrate because it's 7 people's birthday in my immediate family. So we've got all kinds of parties going on. It's like nonstop. But tonight, I'm happy to be doing this. And if you would like to be a sponsor for the flowers, you also can sponsor them. Next month is open, and simply get in touch with me or Janice, and we'll help you to get those flowers sponsored. And tonight we'll be giving roses away because my wife was unable to make it in person. So we'll be giving those to you as you leave. Be sure to get a flower. We're kind of celebrating in advance Valentine's Day, if you notice the theme in the social hall with all the hearts and love. And so we have red roses tonight for you. You're welcome. We also have 3 wonderful presentations. We have Dr. Helman, a Harvard and MIT doctor. We've got Bill Faloon, founder of Perpetual Life, and Sandy Martin, the founder of the Biohacking Expo in Miami next month. We're going to be having all of them tonight. You're not going to want to miss a word that they have to say. But during the events, during the presentations, please make note of your questions. Each one will have a Q&A, a questions and answers session after their talk. And it's important that we bring a microphone to the people so that the people in Zoom and in YouTube live stream can hear what the question is. So we want to get a microphone to you. We have now an inspirational and the creed from Dr. Peter Dreyer.
Thank you. And I just want to have a show of hands of all the people who are coming here for the first time. 1, 2, 3. We've had amazing people here, and I encourage you to get to know everybody, as many other people as you can at dinner, because everybody here is doing something scientific with aging, age reversal as it's called now, including myself. But I'm going to tell, for last time we were together was before Hanukkah, Christmas, New Year's, and my family took me on a trip to Morocco, and I had not an aging experience there, but a almost death experience. I got a fecal disease that is normally deadly, like cholera or typhoid. And my relatives didn't want me to go to the hospital there because they didn't speak English, and they, on one side they're embalming someone that was there a few hours ago, and the other side they're butchering an animal or something. But anyway, so how do you treat fecal disease? Because I want to say there's no pills, but it was pretty darn scary. And so what I did was just drank as much water as I could to flush out the bad bacteria, so you get the population down. If you leave food in there and the population gets big enough, they'll tear through your intestinal wall and you'll go into septic shock and die instantly. So I saved myself by using some just physics and basic chemistry to flush out those bad guys. Now the problem was I wasn't urinating, because that meant none of the water I was drinking was crossing the intestinal barrier because it was inflamed. And so I was dehydrating, and this is a desert where it's like 20% relative humidity. And I thought, before long, my blood's going to clot, go to my heart attack, and I'm going to die. And so I realized that just doing fresh water, I need to add some salt to it. So I add a little bit of salt, and what do you know? Whew, I was able to urinate again, and I survived. So I'm here this week because I prevented death. Now, preventing death is different from just aging. Nobody dies of old age. And if people practicing here can live to more than 100 years old, even though their body looks old, they're still internally healthy. So that's our magic. And that's what we're all about. And that's what our creed is about. And I want you to read the creed along with me. Perpetual Life Creed. We believe that all of life is sacred and that we have been given this one life to make unlimited. We believe in our Creator's divine plan for all of humanity to have infinite lifespans in perfect health and eternal joy, rendering death to be optional. By following our gospel, we achieve eternal life, creating a heaven here on earth. We follow Nikolai Fedorov, who taught that the transcendence of the Creator will only be solved when humanity, in our unified efforts, become an instrument of universal resuscitation, when the divine word becomes our divine action. And we follow Arthur C. Clarke, who said the only way to discover the limits of the possible is to go beyond them into the impossible. And so we enter each day energized in spirit and empowered by the words of our prophets to live in joy, serving our Creator and all of mankind forever and ever.
Dr. Peter Dreyer. It gives me good pleasure to announce the Volunteer of the Month, and this month it is Dr. Peter Dreyer, Volunteer of the Month. We've had, we've had a number of people, and we're very happy. Last month was Mark Laux. We've had Rudy Hoffman, Tanya, and also David Feldman. David, where are you? Please stand. David Feldman helped out so much this month, going to Lowe's multiple times, donating his own things. Thank you, David. David Pickleball Feldman, we'll call him, because he's the pickleball champion, apparently, of Broward County. I'd like to also point out that we have here today Dr. Kurt Whitmore. Dr. Whitmore, yes, with the Maharaj Institute, along with Lori. You might as well stand, Lori, right there. She's the eyes and the ears of the organization of the Stem Cell Institute there in Boynton Beach. We're glad to have you. And also Caroline Bryan with Hippocrates. Caroline is outside, I think. That's okay. She doesn't have to take a bow. I just want you to know. Be sure to see Caroline. She's at her booth over there. She's got a lot of cool things, neat little gadgets. You might want to pick one up or talk with her about. Hey, there she is, Caroline Bryan. She's also famous for Doctor Days over there at Hippocrates. So glad to have you tonight. So now I'd like to also go back to what Peter was saying earlier, and that is the new guests. If you don't mind, let's go ahead and welcome in the new guests. We might even have a song for this, I'm not sure, but if you're here for the very first time, never been here before, please put your hand up because we have a gift for you. We have a gift for you, and we've got over here Scott and here Devin going to give you a necklace, and we do have music. And by having this necklace, it puts you first in line for the dinner buffet, the 5-star buffet that follows all of the speakers. We have, in honor of the speakers, a 5-star buffet, and this will bring you to the front of the line, and they're going to bring you a book as well afterwards. So be sure to keep your hand up, be sure to get your necklace, and that will entitle you to this book that we have as well that I hope you'll enjoy. And for the members who've been here for coming a long time, if you see a guest wearing the Valentine's necklace, the hearts and necklace, be sure to escort them to the front of the line so they know at the end of the event. Okay. Next month, February the 27th. Next month, February 27th. Okay, good. I want to let you know that it's a great month to bring a friend. It's a great month to bring a guest. So next month is all about that. So be sure to bring your friends at that time. Devin and Scott have some books for you. If you haven't received your book, keep your hand up until you get your book. Okay. Let's bring up our speakers. Our first speaker tonight is Dr. Josh Helman, and he's an emergency medicine physician licensed in 14 states. He has 2 degrees in biochemistry, a bachelor's from Harvard, a magna cum laude, and a master's from the University of Cambridge in the UK. His dual medical degrees is from Harvard Medical School and MIT, and he is a board certified by both the American Board of Emergency Medicine and the American Board of Lifestyle Medicine. Dr. Josh is committed to staying up to date with the latest research and developments in emergency medicine and lifestyle medicine. He is an active member of several professional organizations, really too many to list right now, including the American Academy of Emergency Medicine and the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. He has training in neurotoxicity, Lyme disease, petrochemical and mold toxicity. He has served as an attending physician throughout his career and was formerly the medical director for Hippocrates Health Institute up there in Palm Beach, and has worked at the True North Health Center for several years with a focus on fasting, something some of you I know are doing now. His areas of interest include vitality, longevity, toxins, exosomes, biofilm, chronic neurological diseases, mold, Lyme disease, and fasting. He is passionate about applying his biochemical knowledge to the real-world challenges. He embraces an integrative approach, including the importance of diet and lifestyle for optimum health. In his free time, he likes to exercise, travel, and he hike. He's an avid reader, enjoying to learn about history, science, and philosophy, some things we share in common. Dr. Joshua Helman is known to help people reverse and prevent Alzheimer's and aging. Let's welcome Dr. Josh Helman.
Thanks so much, Neil. That's amazing. And thanks to everyone here and present and online watching this. So today I'm going to be talking about reversing Alzheimer's, which is my focus. We're going to be talking about root causes and solutions. And for those of you who want more information, there's I wouldn't say a handout, but there's definitely more information if you just go to drjosh.com/program. So drjosh.com/program. And this is very personal. I'm going to start with my grandma, Eileen. When I was a teenager, my grandmother developed Alzheimer's. And I saw through the eyes of a teenager, not just the effect it had on her, but on my own parents and their generation, because they're thinking, wow, if Grandma Eileen could get Alzheimer's, that could be me in 20 or 30 years. So that's what I saw as a teenager, and ever since then, I've had on my mind, how can I prevent and hopefully reverse Alzheimer's so what happened to her doesn't happen to friends, family, and patients and colleagues. And it's also this whole area of lifestyle medicine is also very personal to me, because a dozen years ago, I was 50 pounds overweight and had high blood pressure, which, I'm a Harvard-trained physician. You would think that I would have the tools to avoid being overweight and avoid high blood pressure, I was up to 4 medications for high blood pressure. None of them seemed to work. So that's me on the left, 50 pounds overweight, and then on the right is me after losing the weight and bringing down my blood pressure. So as you heard, I've got 2 degrees from Harvard, licensed in 14 states around the United States. I'm chief medical officer. I've been back at Hippocrates for 6 months. We also have a startup in the audience is Greg Buckley with Alzheimer's Treatment Centers of America. And I'm also with another startup called Brain Power. 2 degrees in biochemistry. I did work in a fasting center called True North for a few years in Northern California. And people would spend 40 days with us and spend lots of money, and all they would do was drink water. But they did that because many of their chronic diseases would go away. And I also worked at a dementia reversal center in Tampa, Florida for 6 years. So what I'm going to share with you is not some theory in a textbook. This is real world. I love research. I love research in the area of dementia and Alzheimer's. But I want to be continuing to treat patients real time to take away their dementia, their Alzheimer's. And I'm double board certified both in lifestyle medicine and emergency medicine. As you heard, I'm a nerd at heart. So I went to a Harvard MIT medical school program. And again, my website is drjosh.com, drjosh.com. You can find me on social media under Green Brains MD, Optimized with Dr. Josh. Yes, if I only had a green brain, life would be great. Okay, so I've given this lecture literally to thousands of people, and I'll share with you some of the reactions that I've had. Actually, and I don't think it's going to be necessarily you all, but to the general public, about 1 in 3 people think that it is not possible to reverse Alzheimer's. And when I'm talking about that, they think, well, because it's not possible, I don't know what I'm talking about. I can assure you I do. Number 2, I'm going to be sharing new technologies and new treatments, and that's what really makes me excited. And finally, when we're talking about, it's one thing to prevent Alzheimer's, but once you reach a chronic disease like Alzheimer's, it's my opinion, you have to layer all these treatments together, including lifestyle, including smart supplements, and we'll go over that. So some disclaimers, this is not medical advice. Definitely consult your own doctor before making any changes. If your doctor doesn't feel comfortable with this topic, then seek out people like me. And I'm not endorsed by any government agency like the FDA or FTC. I'm not being paid by the food industry or big pharma. But at the end, I will be talking about an FDA-approved treatment for compassionate use to reverse Alzheimer's. And yes, Alzheimer's is a devastating disease. The exciting thing is we now have published, randomized, controlled clinical trial showing that you can reverse Alzheimer's using lifestyle. So this isn't just my opinion. This is published literature from Dean Ornish. And he was able to show with his group that after 20 weeks of the appropriate lifestyle approach, you can reverse Alzheimer's. And back in November of 2023, I did an online summit called The Truth About Alzheimer's. We had 30,000 attendees from around the world, and we interviewed 40 of the world's experts on Alzheimer's. So if you ever have trouble sleeping some night, you can access this on my website, drjosh.com, drjosh.com. And Alzheimer's is a clever thief because it not only steals memory, but the very thing you need to understand that you've lost it. So let's start with the basics. What in the world is Alzheimer's disease? If you look it up in a dictionary, Alzheimer's is a progressive neurologic disorder that affects memory, thinking, and behavior. And it turns out Alzheimer's is the most common cause of dementia in older adults in this country. It's like 60 or 70%. So not all cases of dementia are Alzheimer's, but in the common parlance, they're sometimes used interchangeably, and that's what I'll do tonight in this. So the brain is a complex, very complex organ. Some people said it's the most complex organ in the universe. I don't know about you all, I haven't been in the whole universe. But I can tell you it's extremely complex. You're talking about billions of neurons and trillions of connections. And we only understand a tiny fraction of it. And we're talking about brain disorders. So if you ever run into someone who's super confident, like I know everything about the brain, they don't. So, all right, so how many different types of Alzheimer's disease are there? I'm going to make this participatory. How many people think there's only one type of Alzheimer's? How many people think there are 3 types? Right, so a few hands went up. How many people think there are 5 types? Good. More hands. How many people think there are more than 5 types? So the majority, the majority think there are more than 5 types. Well, recently there was a paper published that showed that they studied the CSF, the fluid surrounding the brain, in over 400 patients. They looked at over 1,000 proteins, and at least in that paper, they found 5 different types of Alzheimer's. And I don't think the subtypes are important, but to me, the exciting thing is for each subtype, there is a potential best treatment. And again, that is the part of this that excites me the most. All right, so how common is Alzheimer's disease? Unfortunately, it's very common and it's becoming more common. We're talking about 7 million people in the United States. 1 in 3 seniors die with dementia. And it's not just the United States. China is expected to have 40 million people living with dementia by 2050. Now, the Chinese have been known to maybe exaggerate their numbers a little bit, but even if it's only 20 million, this is not just an American problem. And China is getting this because China's adopting Western American lifestyle. So, what causes Alzheimer's? It's complicated because there are many different causes of Alzheimer's. In fact, what we're finding is in any one case, there are between 30 and 200 root causes, which you can imagine that makes treatment more difficult when you're trying to treat so many different root causes. And here is an example. If you actually draw out and categorize the different causes, you get a pie chart that looks like this. And just to go over some of the categories, you've got genetic, you've got endotoxins, which are bacteria that are present in animal products and also in our gut. You've got something called glycotoxins. You've got xenotoxins. Xenotoxins refer to man-made toxins like PCBs, dioxins, forever chemicals that didn't exist before the industrial age. You've got vascular problems. You've got trauma. You've got autoimmunity where your own immune system is attacking itself. You've got malnourishment. You've got problems with mitochondria. Mitochondria are present in almost every cell, and they are responsible for both energy production and removing toxins. And then you've got what's called atrophic signaling. And just to understand that everyone's pie chart like this is going to be unique. So I would argue before you start treating Alzheimer's, you actually need to know the root causes. So you can tailor for each individual patient a personalized approach. So what are some interesting causes of Alzheimer's that I've seen? One is from the data, from the AI machine learning models we have, it turns out that sleep disorders are the #1 cause. I'll talk about sleep towards the end, but what happens specifically during N3 deep sleep, that's the time that the amyloid plaque can be removed and memories can be consolidated. Inflammation is also a common root cause for Alzheimer's. And then infections that have been linked to Alzheimer's include herpes virus, pneumonia, syphilis, Lyme disease, mold, and gum disease, gingivitis. Thank you. And you can imagine anatomically, it's not a huge distance from your mouth to the brain. And I think that's what's going on in many of these cases. So how long does it take for Alzheimer's disease to develop? It turns out it's often 30 years or longer, and for the first 20 years, it may not be symptomatic. So I'm so glad I'm talking to you all here in present and online, because there are definitely things that you can do in advance to prevent Alzheimer's from developing. So what are some of the risk factors for Alzheimer's? Well, there are many. As Dr. Oz has said, genetics loads the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. I think this is very important because it gives agency to all of us. So for example, you could have been born with one of the bad genes for Alzheimer's, like the ApoE4. But if you do everything right when it comes to lifestyle, you're not at increased risk. And the earlier you detect Alzheimer's, the more you can do to slow its progression and improve the quality of life. Now, I love the fact that we're talking here and we're among, I would say, a friendly audience that's interested in prevention. But right now, as we speak in 2025, if you look at traditional medical insurance in this country, this is what the Medicare guidelines say, section 2251.3. A treatment plan that seeks to prevent disease, promote health, and prolong and enhance the quality of life, or therapy that is performed to maintain or prevent deterioration of a chronic condition is deemed not medically necessary. So that's why people say, well, I want my insurance to cover it, and it's cool when insurance does pay for certain tests, but understand that many of the tests and treatments we're developing, I would say, in a parallel universe where we're not bound by these guidelines that say you have to wait until you have an end-stage chronic disease, then and only then are we going to cover it. So what are some of the risk factors? I mentioned the ApoE4. There's also lifestyle, diet, and then there are chronic diseases like diabetes or heart disease that if you don't control and fix the diabetes and heart disease, that puts you at an increased risk for developing Alzheimer's. So as Nelson Mandela said, exercise is the key not only to physical health, but to peace of mind. So what's exciting is when you exercise, you release growth factors like BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic growth factor, and then these growth factors stimulate the growth of new neurons and new neural connections, synaptic connections. And I see Dr. Joel Kahn in the audience. For this slide, what's good for your heart is good for your brain. It makes sense that if your heart is not pumping up enough blood and the blood vessels like the carotid to your brain is not working, and oh yeah, by the way, the brain is an extremely vascular structure, that if all those things are not operating well, that your brain is not going to be optimally functioning. And as Hippocrates never said, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. I studied ancient Greek in high school and college, and so when I saw this quote, it's like, I want to find this in the original Greek. It doesn't exist. But I guess you could argue that Hippocrates did prescribe healthy food for people to reverse and prevent disease. And so what is my opinion on the ideal food? And don't throw food at me right now. If I'm not describing your ideal diet, but this is how I read the literature and taking care of patients, what I've seen for many years. You want to eat whole plants, fruits, vegetables, whole grains. You want to avoid animal products. And you want to avoid adding salt, oil, and sugar because those three things will do damage to your blood vessels. And I also like to argue that if you look over the last 100 years, the consumption of the average American is very different than it was before, specifically with the salt, oil, and sugar. And I'll just show you some quick graphs here. So this graph shows the pounds of sugar consumed per person per year. This actually goes back hundreds of years, but you can see over the last 100 years, it's been basically straight up progression, and it's not a healthy progression. And what I'm talking about here is added sugar. I'm not talking about whole fruits or whole vegetables. I'm talking about processed foods that have added sugar. Next, if we talk about oil consumption in the diet, in the green there, you can see that actually oil consumption in the last 100 years has gone up by a factor of 1,000 times. 1,000 times. And despite what you might hear about, olive oil is good for you, etc. No, unfortunately, if you eat a fatty meal with oils, what you eat ends up in you. If I eat a meal high in oil and then draw my blood, you're going to see the sludge blood. You're going to see actually the inflammation, if you look under a microscope, the rouleau formation from the oil. And then finally, salt consumption has gone up also dramatically in the last 100 years as salt has been used as a preservative for shelf-stable processed foods that can sit in the supermarket for a year. And yes, from this graph, the salt consumption has come down a little bit when we realized in the 1980s, like, hey, we're seeing all this high blood pressure. Maybe it's not good to add so much sodium to the diet. But you can also see it hasn't come down anywhere near what it was like 100 years ago. All right, so what does the government, what does the CDC say about the known risks and what you can do to prevent Alzheimer's and dementia? Well, here are the risk factors they list. Not getting enough physical activity, I agree. High blood pressure, yes. Cigarette smoking, yes. Diabetes. Now, this is interesting. They say excessive alcohol use. Well, we know that alcohol is a neurotoxin. I think they put the word excessive just because of the power of the alcohol lobby. But just understand, in terms of preventing developing cancer and brain disease, alcohol is not your friend. And then depression, obesity, and hearing loss. So if you were to go to a neurologist or a family doctor today, what are some of the traditional treatments that you are going to be offered for Alzheimer's if you were diagnosed? There's this class of drugs called cholinesterase inhibitors that increase the amount of acetylcholine. An example is Aricept. Another class are what were called NMDA inhibitors like Namenda. They offer some help with the symptoms. And then there's an antibody prescription drug called Leqembi that was recently approved. I think it has too many side effects. I'll go over that in a little bit. Okay, so cholinesterase inhibitors can help some of the symptoms, but you see nausea and insomnia and some of the other side effects. The way these work is they increase the amount of acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is the major neurotransmitter in the brain. So you can imagine if I get the amount of acetylcholine up in my brain, the synapses, the connections are going to work much better. Now, the reverse side of this is true. For patients who are on anticholinergic medications, whether they're prescription or over the counter, we recommend that people stay away from them. And what are some of the examples of anticholinergic medications? Something like Benadryl, antihistamine. And so let me just be clear. I'm not saying never take Benadryl. If you're having an allergic reaction, yes, definitely take Benadryl. What I am saying is do not take it on a daily basis every night to get to sleep, because unfortunately, on a chronic basis, it's going to decrease the amount of acetylcholine, which will hurt brain function. Now, the corollary to this is that when we see a typical 70-year-old with dementia, they actually might be on 10 medications. 5 of those 10 may be anticholinergics, and we can often switch them from an anticholinergic to a one that doesn't have the side effect. All right, so another class of medications associated with dementia includes statins, which cause CoQ10 deficiency. Now, the good news is often the dementia that'll happen for some patients with statins can be reversible after you stop the medication, but not in all cases. I was giving a lecture a few months ago in Jupiter, Florida here, and there was a gentleman in the back who played banjo professionally. He was on a statin, and he stopped it after a few months, but he still has not gotten his dementia fixed. And here's some other medications that we see associated with dementia. Opiates, proton pump inhibitors like omeprazole, which we know increase amyloid plaque and decrease vitamin B12. Benzodiazepines like Xanax and Valium. Tricyclic antidepressants like Elavil or amitriptyline. And SSRIs like Prozac, Paxil, and Zoloft. Benzodiazepines, the risk seems to increase the longer you take it. So if you're only on benzos like Xanax for 3 months, your risk of developing Alzheimer's goes up by 32%. But if you're on it for a year, the risk goes up by, say, a factor of 84%. All right, and so a class of medication that prevents dementia turns out to be Viagra. Yeah. So how does Viagra, sildenafil, prevent Alzheimer's? A few ways. It's been shown to reduce amyloid plaques. It's also been shown to enhance blood flow through nitric oxide. And I think someone else may be talking about nitric oxide later today, but how does nitric oxide, well, first of all, what is nitric oxide? It's a gas. It's just one nitrogen and one oxygen atom stuck together. It turns out that it opens up blood vessels and our nitric oxide levels go down as we get older. It's also been shown to be neuroprotective and to reverse tau tangles that you often see with Alzheimer's. So what are the recommended daily doses? These are prescription drugs in the United States. Viagra, 25 milligrams, Cialis, 2.5 milligrams, Levitra, 2.5 milligrams. And yes, I think this works not just on men, but for women too, to prevent dementia. So what are some of the problems with the existing therapies that are being offered for Alzheimer's? Well, as an example, Leqembi is an antibody against amyloid. It was approved just over the last couple of years. Here are some of the side effects. In a third of patients, you see brain bleeds and brain swelling. To the point where if you want to be on Leqembi or a similar medication, they require that you get monthly brain scans so they can catch the bleeding and or swelling early. But the drug company's smart. They came up with a plan. We're not going to call this a side effect. They call it an ARIA. That sounds like a nice song, right? ARIA stands for amyloid-related imaging abnormalities. Okay. And so that's what's currently on offer by many people out there. What am I offering for my patients? What are some non-traditional treatments for Alzheimer's? Lifestyle. Getting people to exercise, eat the right things, reduce stress. Supplements, and supplements including omega-3s. I'll cover that in a little bit. And then in terms of diet, there's lots of published literature on the MIND diet or the Mediterranean diet. And then physical activity. The more you exercise, the fitter your brain will be. So I would say do the type of exercise you enjoy doing it, and your brain will thank you later. And then cognitive engagement. Our brains are designed to stay active. So as in this picture, doing a crossword puzzle or Sudoku, that's good because you're remembering things you learn, like a 5-letter word for a body of water. But what is even more challenging to the brain in a good way is learning a new language, new music, visiting a new place. Now, this is my first trip to this church. This is great. Sleep and Alzheimer's. Sleep is key, specifically the N3 deep sleep. And then stress management. I understand it's important that, of course, everyone is going to have some stress. I'm not saying you're going to be able to relieve all stress. What I am saying is if you're constantly checking your phone every 15 minutes or more often, to check from your boss or to check what people are saying about me on social media, that could be stressful, and we were not designed for that type of stress. So the greatest healing therapy is friendship and love and social engagement. Social engagement, having a community like this community here in person or online is an amazing way to help your brain. No one should face Alzheimer's alone. Definitely reach out for support and resources. So anyone who stops learning is old, whether they're 20 years old or 80 years old. And what's also important is the environment that we're in. So, as an example, air pollution and lead have definitely been shown to be associated with Alzheimer's and dementia. So you want to do what you can to limit your exposure to toxins, and once they're inside of you, because many of these are fatty toxins that have a half-life of, say, 20, 30, 40 years or longer, you want to get those toxins out of you. And then the brain-gut axis. I know it sounds really weird. I'm talking about the brain. Like the brain and the gut are nowhere near each other, but it turns out they're intimately related. As an example, the protein that's responsible for controlling what's called a leaky gut it's called zonulin. That same protein is responsible for the blood-brain barrier. So normally, if you've got a leak in one, you've got a leak in the other. And then hormones. Hormones are important for every single organ in the body, including the brain. As an example, thyroid hormone. If you don't have adequate thyroid hormone, your brain cells are not going to be functioning adequately. And I'm often asked this, so I included it in my presentation. What are my 5 favorite supplements for preventing Alzheimer's? Here they are. Number 1 is omega-3 fatty acids. I especially like the ones from algae. The dose I recommend is 3 grams a day. And I like the algae oil specifically because I think we need to get higher amounts of DHA, EPA, and EPA. And also, you want to make sure that you have lower levels of oxidation. So that's why whatever type of omega-3 you're taking, I would refrigerate them, even if you're not purchasing them in a refrigerated. What's challenging is if you want to get omega-3s, it turns into a mathematics lesson sometimes where you may say, oh, there's this much natural omegas in there, like 1,600 milligrams, but it turns out only half of that is omega-3. In this example, it's 820 milligrams. And I like algae oil, but I also like what you see here is where you can actually scan whatever oil you're about to put in your body. I want to know a few things. Number 1, does it actually have what it says it has on the label? And number 2, I want to make sure it doesn't have any toxins or oxidation, or if it does, that it's in a very low level. And this is an example where you can actually check, go to the lot that you're purchasing, go to their website, put the number in, and then pull up the specific, both the amount and the toxins and oxidation involved. Number 2 is lion's mane mushroom. And the dose of lion's mane, so again, this isn't just an opinion, we have published literature on this. This was a study done in 2020, patients ages 50 and older with mild Alzheimer's. They showed significant cognitive improvement after taking 1,000 milligrams of lion's mane daily for 49 weeks. You don't have to start with 1,000 milligrams of lion's mane a day, but I definitely recommend lion's mane. And the third one is nitric oxide. So you can get nitric oxide using greens, chewing leafy greens and beets. The challenge is when you do that, the nitric oxide that gets produced only lasts, say, 2 to 4 hours. I like a supplement which actually is designed to last 24 to 36 hours, and there's several on the market for that. Okay. And then the next category I like is called creatine. Now, many of you have heard of creatine, from bodybuilders, and 95% of the creatine is in your muscle, but it turns out we now know creatine is also a neurotransmitter, 5% of the creatine is in your brain. So that's why I like creatine. And the dose I like is 5 grams a day. And finally, I like a supplement called NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide, which increases NAD production. And the dose, everyone's going to be different in terms of what they need, but the dose I like on that is 1 gram a day. And again, you can find this information on my handout at drjosh.com/handout. Okay, and then is NMN not M&Ms? M&Ms are not health promoting, especially artificial flavors. No, you don't want that stuff. Okay, and then as a bonus, there's one called Hinokiol, which is derived from magnolia bark. It's anti-cancer, neuroprotective. It decreases amyloid beta and is anti-inflammatory. 1 capsule twice a day. And yeah, as Seth Rogen has said, we're all in this together. We can make a difference in the fight against Alzheimer's. Desmond Tutu said, hope is being able to see that there is light despite all of the darkness. So here's some insight from working 6 years in the field, reversing dementia, in terms of, number one, I like IV medications more than oral for end-stage patients because I know that I'm going to be delivering the medicine to the brain. With oral administration, they may have a bad gut, mold in the gut. Those medications may never be absorbed into the brain. Number two, I think it's important to do detoxification first with things like IV glutathione and IV phosphatidylcholine, and we would offer colonics to our patients at least twice a week. And number three, we saw amazing results once we added IV exosomes to our practice as a great way to regenerate the brain, but we would only do exosomes after we had done the detoxification. And then for patients with infections, we would use IV antibiotics and IV supplements when indicated. And we were following our patients with functional studies, function of the brain, things like PET scan of the brain with neuroquant imaging, which will help us identify and localize the brain pathology. As an example, fatty toxins like PCBs, dioxins, plastics tend to spread throughout the entire brain, but infections tend to clump in one area. I think bugs like family and friends around them to fight the body's immune system. I think that's what's going on. So again, I'll remind you the problems with the existing therapy out there, for example, Leqembi, the antibody against amyloid, are these brain bleeds and brain swelling. What is an alternative? We found one, fortunately. So instead of targeting the amyloid plaque, we now know that amyloid is actually helpful to fight infection. It's part of the body's healing mechanism. So you can imagine if I cut my hand, and every time I started getting clotting and the hand healing, the wound healing, I rubbed it away, that wound would never heal. That's what's going on if the brain is trying to form this amyloid plaque and we're attacking with antibodies. That's what's causing the brain bleeds and the brain swelling with these newer medications. You need to target the underlying inflammation. And it's not really a new molecule, but there is, you may have heard that there are lectins in food. It turns out there are also lectins in people. We produce our own lectins. And as an example, there's one called galectin-3, which we now know is responsible for the many different chronic diseases from A to Z. So specifically, galectin-3 is a galactoside binding lectin. You can tell I love all this biochemistry stuff. It's secreted by active macrophages. Macrophages are the part of the immune system, the white blood cells that are like Pac-Man that will eat up infections and cancer cells, etc. And it was actually first discovered in humans in 1994. And from A to Z, from asthma to zoster, so many chronic diseases, including brain diseases, we're finding increased levels of galectin-3. It was first commercially developed in this country as a test for congestive heart failure. All right, so what's going on? In this picture, you see galectin-3 has basically 5 arms to it. And if you don't block, if you let, with dementia and Alzheimer's, um, this galectin-3 will actually cause cross-linking and plaque formation. So what this new FDA-approved drug for compassionate use does, it's shown in red there, it blocks the cross-linking, so the plaque gets dissolved and cognition has been improved. So yes, so fortunately, it's a current phase 2 study. I'm one of the investigators, and I'll just show you a comparison for this new medication in Leqembi, the one that causes bleeding. So this new one is going after galectin-3, and we're not seeing any cases of cerebral edema or swelling or bleeding, but we are seeing a 63% reduction in the dementia scale. And we're also seeing, I'll show you a case of this, we're seeing reversal in just 1 month after one dose. It's given every month for 6 months intravenously. And really, we're seeing improvement after just one dose. And we're also seeing a trend within 3 months. So that's why I'm really excited. And there have been over 400 patients treated so far and 0 serious side effects. All right, and this is a patient we treated. Her name's Susan. We gave her 1 dose. So this is a month after her first dose. She's receiving her second dose, and let me see if I can get the audio working.
All good. So, how have you been doing with this so far?
I've been okay. I do feel a little bit more organized, and I have more ability to do the things that I want to do. I get tired, but that could be the weight loss and not doing anything.
All right, so my vision is you want to combine all the modalities together to improve the risk of Alzheimer's. And fortunately, here's another modality that Brian Johnson, who many of you are familiar with, because he's basically turned himself into a guinea pig to see what can I do to reverse aging. You can see here he's getting a new treatment. Well, it's not really new. It's been around for over 50 years. It's called total plasma exchange. You take the blood out of one arm, you run it through a filter, and then you get rid of the toxic part, and then you put in albumin into the other arm. So the studies are showing after 6 of these total plasma exchange treatments, dramatic improvement in Alzheimer's. So here's one more idea or therapy that we're using specifically for sleep, because it's the biggest risk, is you want to optimize the spine with magnetic waves. Now first, you want to fix the Atlas C1, C2 of the spine. I see Dr. Dan and Sam in the audience here. I know that's what they do professionally, which is awesome. You can also, they're using sound waves to align C1 and C2. And their website is atlasclinics.com with Dr. Dan and Dr. Sam. All right, so what we're finding from the study is that for every 1% decrease of the slow wave N3 sleep, you get a 26% increased risk of dementia. So when you're 20 years old, you normally have 2 hours a night of this slow wave N3 sleep. But as you get older, say 65, that goes down to, say, 30 minutes. And when you're 80, it's down to 15 minutes. So what I'm excited about this new technology is this device, using magnetic waves, increases by 50% the N3 sleep. So, and yeah, here's the device. Here, this is what it looks like. And it basically targets 4 parts of the spine. And you can find more information at atca.ai for that. Okay, so Alzheimer's may steal memories but not love. So in summary, how do you prevent and reverse Alzheimer's? You eat plants, you change your lifestyle, get enough exercise, get enough sleep, decrease your stress, have a community. You go after, you take supplements and medications that get at the root causes. You consider this new immune treatment and total plasma exchange. So our approach is different than what you're going to find from most doctors out there. The key message I have to bring to all of you is there is hope. Because so often patients will go to their physician and be told there is nothing we can do. Sure, we're going to give you this medication that will slow down the decline. But I'm here to share with you that there is hope. As Paulo Coelho said, the challenge will not wait. Life does not look back. A week is more than enough time for us to decide whether or not to accept our destiny. The handout again is at drjosh.com/program, drjosh.com/program. Here's my contact information. You've been an amazing audience, and I look forward to questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Josh. Here's a question from Dr. Peter Dreher.
Thank you. My mother had dementia. It turned out to be vascular dementia. Her brain didn't shrink at all. It was just the hyperintensities you saw in the MRI.
Right.
And I'm doing a X Prize submission.
Great.
And one of my Alzheimer treatments is sleeping on your side versus the back of your head.
Sure.
And there's a lot of research showing that makes a big and I tried it, and son of a gun, my memory is dramatically better just by sleeping on the side of my head at the night. And I always slept on the back.
Right.
So in other words, your lymphatic system will not clear the amyloid beta plaques if you sleep on the back of your head. Go on the sides. Is that part of your therapy?
That's one of the things we recommend. But the other piece to that, it could be if you're sleeping on your side, for many people, they have sleep apnea, and it's causing low oxygen to the brain. It could be that sleeping on your side, you're getting more oxygen to the brain. So I'd love to see that X Prize submission. I'd love to see you win. All right. Any other questions?
Yes, we have a question right over
All
here.
right.
Does hyperbaric treatment fit into your protocol?
100%. I am a big fan of hyperbaric oxygen because that's one way. So you deliver pure oxygen at a higher pressure, which delivers more oxygen to the brain, because low oxygen hypoxia is one of the root causes for Alzheimer's. So I'm a big fan of hyperbaric.
What about adding oxygen to a CPAP machine?
Yeah, so I think oxygen through CPAP for someone who's got sleep apnea, I think is definitely appropriate. And to be clear, it's not, I love hyperbarics, but there are micro nano bubbles to deliver oxygen. There's more than one way to deliver it, but I love hyperbaric. There.
What do you think of methylene blue? It's known to cross the blood-brain barrier, increases the mitochondria. Call it a magic bullet. Supposed to be in all the hospitals. It's used to treat, I believe, malaria.
I've used methylene blue to treat methemoglobinemia, where a patient would come in completely blue. This sounds really weird. Patient comes in blue, and you give them this IV bag that's blue, and they suddenly pink up, and they get oxygen. My opinion about methylene blue, which is ancient, it's one of the first dyes from synthetic dyes developed over 100 years ago. So you're right, it can improve mitochondria. I like it, but with many therapies, you have to go low and slow, and I'll tell you why. Methylene blue was also investigated, and still is, an antibiotic. So if I'm treating a patient who's got Lyme disease or other infections in their brain, and I give them high-dose methylene blue, it will kill the Lyme spirochetes, but it will bust biofilm, releasing all these toxins and other infections that have built up over the decades, and they can actually get worse. So my advice to you and other people is, yes, look at methylene blue, but go low and go slow. And it's not the first thing I'm doing. And I'd recommend working with someone who knows what they're doing. I don't think they should be putting methylene in the water for everyone to drink.
Question over here. Jose?
Yeah, so you mentioned, and everybody mentions neurons. How about glia cells? Are they affected everything that you spoke? Does that apply also to glia?
Definitely, the glial cells which support the neurons are critically important, and many of the toxins, infections also involve the glial cells. So the glial cells are definitely part of this equation.
What about
That are affected from our pineal organ.
Yes.
What about the effects of radiation from the cell phones?
Yeah, so that's a great point. I would recommend you keep your cell phones as far away from you as possible. And the studies have actually shown that the more radiation you get from cell phones, it actually increases inflammation. So normally we don't want more inflammation, and electronic devices, including cell phones, don't store them near your bed when you're sleeping. Try to keep them as far away possible from you.
Yes, quite a few years ago, I don't remember if it was 15 years ago, I heard about something that was coming out from Germany that was going to help with memory loss. And it was finally came here. It was going to be a lecture that I went to up in Delray in one of the clinics. And at the end of the clinic, I asked the question to the neurologist. I said, do you give this medication, Aminda, to someone who has severe Alzheimer's or moderate or for newbies? And he said, no, it's more for the moderate and the severe. So when I went back south, I called my Dr. Goldberg, the neurologist, and I said, I want you to write a script for Naminda to put my father on Naminda. He has the beginnings of Alzheimer's, and he listened to me because the deceased husband was a neurologist,
Right.
and he, because we were friends, he said, okay. We gave my father the Naminda, and he changed so drastically. His raging and acting out, he calmed down. He was like a pussycat.
Sure.
He was like a little child. He was so easy to handle, but I was told not only for severe and moderate, and he had just the beginnings of Alzheimer's. I'm glad I didn't listen to him.
Yes, no, I think Namenda can help even with mild symptoms, but to be clear, it normally doesn't lead to long-term reversal, but it can be an adjunct while we're trying some of these other therapies. But yeah, I mean, Namenda I mentioned is an NMDA inhibitor, and I'm a fan.
I have a question from Lisa.
Hi. What is the price range for the Soundwave device?
The price range for the sleep device, I think, the sound, it's for sleep, I know it's under a couple $1,000s. It's a new device. I don't know the pricing.
First of all, amazing presentation, Dr. Helman. My question is, I have a problem sleeping every night, falling asleep into a deep sleep and staying consistently, and getting whatever you mentioned earlier.
Sure.
I've been taking ZQL. Do you have any feedback on ZQL or how that affects your body, or any suggestions for me to get better sleep in the night?
And ZQL, Seroquel, or not NyQuil Z?
It helps me fall asleep.
So my concern is kind of the scenario I gave. I believe that is an antihistamine, anticholinergic. So because of that, you're decreasing the amount of acetylcholine in your brain, which long-term is going to increase your risk for getting dementia. So I'm not saying never take it, but there's so many other good approaches or things like melatonin, et cetera, you can try. But I would also say for you and for everyone here, if you're concerned, seek out a sleep doctor. There are doctors who all they do is they work on getting people, they do sleep studies, to see where your sleep is getting interrupted and then try to figure out a plan to reverse the problem. Sure.
Question from Chuck.
Hi. Taking into consideration the average lifespan of a male and female in the U.S. only, is there statistics that you people know approximately when the average person, starts getting dementia or Alzheimer's?
Thank you for that question. So if you figure the average is visible around age, let's say 70, it's becoming younger, but let's say it's 70, and we now know that the symptoms actually start 30 years younger. Math says it probably starts around 40. Alzheimer's is twice as common in women as men, and I think what's going on is around perimenopausal. Is at that time period, the hormones like the brain needs estrogen. I think one of the causes of Alzheimer's we're seeing is hormonal problems. Thanks.
Thank you for the amazing presentation, and just asking about the sleep question. I also have problems at times sleeping, and then I heard about NSDR. So on nights when I don't sleep well, I in the morning I do that. I don't know if that helps. Is there some data to show it? Does it help with the deep sleep? But it does relaxes me.
Can you explain what NSDR is?
Non-sleep deep rest.
I'm not even familiar with. Is that meditation or?
I mean, it's kind of, yeah. So, but for me, just like, if I, the nights when I don't sleep that well,
right.
And in the morning when I do it for like half an hour or something, I mean, it seems to, it's basically comes from the yoga modality. And it's even recommended by, I think the first time I heard about that term was on Andrew's Huberman podcast.
Sure.
And when I try to do that, in the morning after I do it, I feel very fresh. Seems like, I don't know if there's some data or something you were aware of that.
I mean, that sounds like a good approach. The key is, are you getting into like an N3 state with this type of meditation? And it's going to probably vary by person, how deep they get.
Okay, we have a question right here.
When you began, you were mentioning things like Lyme disease, mold,
Sure.
and pollution. I have a concern about pollution caused by misuse of leaf blowers. I think that they have been the worst thing ever to hit mankind. Do you see a rise in that disease because of the use of leaf blowers? I know that many other diseases have come from that.
True. So yes, leaf blowers that are based on petroleum.
Not
that.
It's how they operate. The force of the air, say on the promenade of Fort Lauderdale, where I used to live, they use the leaf blowers on cement where you have dogs and cats and people vomiting and things like that. And these particles, tiny, minute particles, they blast them and they get bounced up into the air, and then they get carried in the circulation of the wind.
Yes.
And then we breathe it in. So
those
kids are coming to the beach to be healthy, and it's been shown that their organs are not forming as well.
Right, so it's a form of air pollution.
It is, yeah.
And I think it's tragic, and we should move to other technologies.
But it's also a causal effect for the Alzheimer's as well.
Right, I think that's one piece of the puzzle. It's frustrating.
Why do we allow them? They're used in urban.
Yeah. If it was up to me, we would get rid of them, but it sounds like a good movement.
Everybody says it's the petroleum and the noise, but it's not.
Question here from Paula.
Have you heard of any articles or read any articles where there's a greater prevalence of Alzheimer's in the elderly in places such as Denver or Santa Fe or Albuquerque versus in Florida where we're at sea level? I mean, does the altitude, the high altitude, less oxygen make a difference?
I think it does. I don't know that, I mean, there's so many variables from place to place, but I think it does make a difference. What's interesting though is like I've been in a medical mission in Nepal where the Nepalese have adapted to the lower oxygen. I don't know if they've studied their brains like that, but that's an interesting question. I'm not sure the answer.
Here's a question from Jeff.
Yes. Do you think berberine and red yeast rice is a good substitute instead of statin drugs?
Yeah, so I am a fan of berberine because it specifically helps with AMPK and other of the basic biochemical pieces that are part of the primitive pathway that can reverse aging. I'm not a fan of red yeast rice because I believe it will have the same type of side effects. Where statins are based on the same HMG-CoA reductase that we find in the red yeast. I can't talk tonight, but it's basically a over-the-counter form of the statin. It's the original form. I would avoid it for the same reason. I don't know that there's data on it, but I would still be concerned.
Question back here from Wendy.
How do you know if you're getting into the N3 sleep stage?
Thank you for that question. Right now, I would recommend you do a formal sleep study. Yes, people have Apple Watches and Oura rings, and those are cool. But right now, as we speak in the beginning of 2025, I don't think they're good enough for teasing out the amount of N3 deep sleep. Now, if you have a formal sleep study and then compare it to your Oura ring, yes, maybe you can make that correlation. But I would recommend a formal sleep study at least once.
Question from Mina.
Hi. You didn't mention anything about mercury. There was a doctor who in the 80s who spoke about it's so simple to reduce or reverse Alzheimer's is getting rid of mercury. And of course, he wasn't invited to a lot of conferences and stuff because it made it simple. That was one question I had.
Yeah, so I think...
And also vaccines having the mercury in it.
Sure. Yeah, so mercury is one of the root causes. There are many other heavy metals, and the sources of mercury, not just fillings for amalgam for teeth. I see it in people who eat fish more than once or twice a week. I normally see immune suppression from the mercury in those patients because, unlike say 100 or 200 years ago, the current wherever you're getting your fish from, there are high levels of heavy metals, including mercury and cadmium. It's not just mercury, but for patients that we see specifically with high mercury, we'll use chelation therapy specifically against the mercury.
The vaccines have mercury in them too, right? And the increase of child vaccines is up to 72 till by the time they're 18.
Right. Many of the vaccines have mercury. Many of them also have aluminum that's used as an adjuvant, and aluminum is associated with Alzheimer's too.
And just ozone, if that's also. You have something to say about ozone?
Yeah, so ozone as a therapeutic, I mean, I grew up in Los Angeles where we didn't want ozone in the air, but as a therapeutic approach, ozone, which is another form of oxygen, is O3, is a great way to bust up biofilm, basically kill bugs. The problem is, like I talked about with methylene blue, you have to be ready for the side effects of busting up the biofilm that has infections and other toxins. So if you are using ozone, make sure you do detox first and during, and dose it appropriately, work with an expert on it.
Adam?
Yes, do you have any recommendations for hearing loss and auditory processing?
Yeah, I'm not an expert. I'm not an audiologist or an ENT doctor, but I would start there. And what's cool is many technology is advancing in that area too, and we're seeing hearing loss as a risk factor for Alzheimer's because not only are you not getting auditory information in, but often the reason you're having hearing loss is it's associated with increased inflammation in the hearing part of the brain, which often, it's not just the hearing part of the brain. Thank you.
And Dennis.
Gosh, thanks for coming. You mentioned the brain needs estrogen. What happens when someone has an estrogen-induced cancer of the breast and they're off it, and how do they substitute?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I am not a big fan of long-term, years and years and years and years of estrogen blockers in cancer patients. I don't claim to be an oncologist, but I would, if I was going through cancer, I would want to find an integrative oncologist who would help me minimize the exposure to estrogen blockers. Because it's not just the brain. Taking away your estrogen is going to affect every organ in your body. So the oncologist might say, you need to be on this estrogen blocker for life for 5 years. I would push whatever you do, trying to minimize that and work with an integrative oncologist who's willing to do that for you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Josh Helman, thank you.
My name is Helman.
So glad you're here. Now, he'll be here afterwards, and you'll be able to speak with him. And I know many of you have more questions. And just before we get to our next speaker, I'd like to invite you all to stand up and stretch. That was a good hour. This is a great time. We do it at RadFest. It's a great time to stretch, get the blood flowing. It's not good to sit for too long, and this is a great time to do that. So don't be shy. Hop up and stretch. And if we have an aerobics instructor, you're welcome to come forward for just 30 seconds. Great. Okay. Our next speaker tonight is the founder of this church and the co-founder of the RadFest and the founder of a number of organizations found around the world. He's a real cornerstone in the radical life extension movement. And let's welcome our own Bill Faloon.
Thank you, Neil. And what I want to initially talk about is the media. They continue to give us favorable coverage. They're talking about in the media right now that if you can make it into the 2030s, this is what some scientists are stating, if you can make it into 2030s, you might achieve immortality, which is the objective of this church. And if you're going to achieve immortality where you can't die of something like Alzheimer's. So that presentation you heard is spectacular. And I had no idea that was going to be the presentation because I'm going to corroborate a little bit of what the Dr. Josh just told you, which is spectacular information. So how can we live long enough to make it into an era when people get to live a long time? Well, here's a real simple way that was validated just a few months ago, a major study showing just daily walking can add 5 years to your lifespan. Now, this corroborates a lot of other research, but this research was done based on large population groups, and many, many complicated data sets were looked at, where if we just can take the time, and I know it's not always easy, to walk an hour or two every day, we get to live a lot longer. And they even drilled it down to just 1 extra day of walking can give you 6 more hours of longer life. Now, this is compared to inactive people, which is the typical aging American. They become inactive. They don't get any exercise in whatsoever, and they develop dementia and cardiovascular issues and malignancies. So we know the penalty we pay for being inactive. And this data set, I hope, impresses you that if you can just squeeze in that hour or 2 a day of walking, you may get to live 5 years longer, meaning you're alive in the 2030s when the technology I'm going to tell you about will become clinically available to potentially reverse our aging process. But I always like to warn people a caveat about walking, and that is a billionaire, a person who was the CEO of Gilead. He was involved in finding a cure for hepatitis C. He was a good person who took his walks, took a fall while walking, and died at the age of 70. We're worth $1.2 billion. So he was doing the right thing, but he died. So I want to warn you, when you take your walk, don't sit there and text your phones while you're walking, and be careful when you're talking on your phones. We lost a very prestigious member of our group, very famous. He went from New York to Los Angeles, walked across Wilshire Boulevard on his cell phone, and got hit by a car 70 miles an hour. 70 miles an hour. Thought he was doing himself a favor, and he died acutely as a result of that. So if you're going to start walking or any form of physical activity, just be careful, because we're not 20 years old anymore. Most of us are well over that age, and any kind of trauma can be lethal. So as it relates to dementia, which you heard a lot about, well, the literature substantiates everything you heard Dr. Josh talk about. This particular study came out in JAMA, August 2024, and it talked about if you eat a healthy diet, you slash your risk of dementia 31%. And this is eating the healthy food, and what they were advocating was the Mediterranean diet. This is what the experts were talking about, and this cooperates what we've talked about at this church since the founding, that healthy eating patterns confer healthy longevity. And you can reduce your risk of overall death by about 25% if you follow a Mediterranean-style diet. And the foods to eat, don't want to be eating sugar processed foods. You don't want to be eating the foods that accelerate systemic aging and they kill us sooner. So this report came out in January of this year where the experts got together, and this was the diet that they recommended most people follow to achieve healthy longevity. Nothing new to this group, but I always like to reinforce what we've talked about for the last 10 years, and that is healthy eating confers healthy longevity and healthy neurological function. And then a study came out again this year, talked about the problems with red meat and processed red meat. And if you want to eat this, you're going to increase your risk of dementia in a major way. And it doesn't take much. That's what this study showed, just a quarter serving of processed red meat. It's associated with a 13% higher risk of dementia. I mean, these foods are toxic. You can't eat a little bit of them without suffering some neurological impairment. So if you're able to stay away from red meat as much as you can, avoid ultra-processed red meat, certainly hot dogs and sausages, all these foods that people eat, they literally are accelerating the rate of brain aging and their risk of dementia. And again, this study that came out in JAMA, August 2024, they looked at the most common measure of degenerative aging systemically and in the brain. And with C-reactive protein, that's an inflammatory marker. If you have high levels, you're 7 times more likely to die from any cause if you have high CRP levels. And what shocks me is conventional doctors don't prescribe a CRP blood test when they're ordering a CBC chemistry and lipid test. They omit the CRP. And what this study showed is that high levels of CRP are a greater risk factor than high levels of LDL. So when your doctor's writing a prescription for a blood test, please ask him to include C-reactive protein, and if it's elevated, take steps to bring it down so that you don't develop these horrific diseases, including premature death, in response to hyperinflammatory problems. I'm going to talk a little bit about something most of you may have not have heard about who are not medical people, myeloproliferative disorders. This is your bone marrow, unfortunately, in which the cells you really don't want to be rapidly propagating and abnormally growing. And that's going to predispose you to a lot of problems. You don't want these problems because if you suffer from a myeloproliferative neoplasm, and that's not necessarily cancer yet, but this is a myeloproliferative set of cells, your risk of leukemia, lymphoma, myeloma, they go up. But so do all the other forms of cancer that terrify us, like brain cancer, glioblastoma. No cure for that. 270% increased risk if you suffer from a myeloproliferative neoplasm. Melanoma, pancreatic cancer, up 170%. And if you develop pancreatic cancer, I hate to tell you, my groups have spent a lot of money researching it, funding research. We haven't been able to extend life much more than a couple months. We don't have a cure for pancreatic cancer, and many of these other malignancies, by the time they're diagnosed, they can become terminal. So this emanates, in many cases, from a myeloproliferative neoplasm. What can you do to reduce your risk of that? Well, something you've heard about, me talking about since 1995, metformin. This big study came out in Denmark, and they were able to show that people who use metformin, well, if they use it for under a year, they reduce their risk of a myeloproliferative disorder 21%. If they use it 1 to 5 years, a 22% lower risk. And here's where it really gets good. If you've been using metformin 5 to about 10 years, you've got a 58% reduced risk of a myeloproliferative disorder, which may help explain why people who take metformin have lower risks of cancer. And if you've been taking metformin over 10 years, 44% lower risk. Now, this is in diabetic patients, and a type 2 diabetic, after 10 years, they've got a lot of pathologies that they're contending with. But nonetheless, if they were using metformin, which they should have been, and we'd like to think this would apply to normal people using metformin, you reduce your risk of a myeloproliferative disorder and therefore reduce your risk of all of these horrific malignancies. Metformin, prescription drug. Doctors are more liberal nowadays about prescribing it. If your doctor doesn't do it, find one that will, order it offshore, get your hands on metformin. I take 850 milligrams twice a day. I've been doing that since around the year 2000, and I'd like to think I've reduced my risk of a myeloproliferative disorder in addition to all the other benefits that metformin confers. And as it relates to the effect on brain aging, this study came out a couple months ago, and it talked about monkeys, the human equivalent of 40 to 50 years, given metformin, and it slowed the rate of brain aging, and by some measures, it caused a 6-year regression of brain aging in response to these monkeys taking metformin. So I should ask this group again, because I do almost every lecture, how many are now taking metformin at this point? You know, we're getting almost to 50%. Now, I know that about 15% of you cannot tolerate it from a GI standpoint, and we haven't figured out a workaround for that problem yet. But if you are able to get your hands on this drug, it's inexpensive, it lowers glucose and insulin levels in a healthy way, and we now know how it probably prevents cancers, and that is it reduces the risk of myeloproliferative disorders in a major, major way. And metformin is something that our groups have recommended since 1995, and we based that on solid research. The diabetics who take metformin, well, they do a lot better than diabetics who don't take it. It's why it's the most popular anti-diabetic drug right now prescribed. And diabetics taking metformin, a 36% reduction in all-cause mortality. Your risk of dying from any cause if you're a diabetic taking metformin is improved by, well, taking metformin. This is what we've been advocating. And if you're not a diabetic, just a pre-diabetic, and you start taking metformin, you reduce your risk of progressing to type 2 diabetes about 31%. If you start that under age 60, you reduce your risk of contracting type 2 diabetes by 58%. And you might lose some weight. I've had people lose a lot of weight on metformin. I've had people lose no weight on metformin, but it may help you lose a little bit of body weight, but also reduce your risk of advancing into a type 2 diabetic situation, may reduce your risk of contracting a malignancy. And in the event you contract cancer, let's say colon cancer, and you're taking metformin, well, you reduce your risk of a recurrence by about 75%. A huge number, and then your risk of metastases virtually cut in half if you're taking metformin and being treated for colon cancer. And at this point, we typically recommend almost any cancer patient consider metformin and probably 7 or 8 off-label drugs as adjuvant therapies to improve one's overall of surviving a malignancy. And again, 5-year survival, if you're taking metformin, you get 57%. If you're not taking it, it's 37%. So it just makes sense to take the metformin drug, and deaths in the metformin group, well, 48%, but if you're not taking it, 76%. And these are colon cancer patients who've undergone surgery, and we look at the long-term survival. If they're taking metformin, it's improved, and there are a number of other drugs I've spoken about that can also improve overall survival in response to using an off-label drug to treat a malignancy that you might think is all gone, but if there's any remaining cells, you have metformin in your body, you're going to reduce your risk of having a problem. So what are we doing, our research groups right now, to reverse aging in mice, monkeys, and people? Well, we're using the Yamanaka factors, OSK. We're using them in mice, seeing great results. We're moving it into primates, i.e. monkeys. We're hoping in about 2 years, people. Reverse aging in people the way it's done in mice. Yamanaka transcription factors. Now, these literally reprogram old cells back into younger cells that can theoretically regenerate our tissues forever. That's the theory. We now have to prove it in clinical reality. At the Salk Institute, 2022, they gave the OSKM transcription factors to mice, and they reversed aging. This made international headline news. For the first time, a therapy introduced systemically reversed aging. And then another group 2 years later did it even better. They measured lifespan, and they were able to show that just OSK, that's 3 out of 4 Yamanaka factors, that increased remaining median lifespan about 100%, improved the overall health, age reversal in the heart and liver as measured by DNA methylation patterns, and even human cells, when they were given these OSK Yamanaka factors, they were able to show dramatic age reversal benefits. So again, Yamanaka factors are proteins known as transcription factors that when they bind to DNA, they turn on and off certain genes. And what they want to do is turn on the genes that confer youthful vitality and turn off the genes that confer, unfortunately, degenerative aging. So we've talked about these before. I'm giving you an update on what our research groups are doing now to make this a clinical reality so people can go into their doctor's office and get injections of these Yamanaka factors and hopefully grow biologically younger. So the challenge is, which is the best way to deliver these into cells? And the great news is, well, we've got a lot of different ways of doing it. It can be a viral vector, a plasmid-based vector, lipid nanoparticles, which is what our group is studying right now intensively, chemical reprogramming. And what that does is literally take the OSK that are already naturally in your body, and it can reignite the expression of those OSK transcription factors so that you may grow biologically younger by simply bringing back to life the OSK that was in your body as an embryo. They helped your embryo mature into an adult, and they can help an older adult mature backwards into a healthy young person. So what I've done is create a graph, and I'm hoping everyone in this room will be able to understand what this is. I'm going to take a little bit of water break right now. I have attended, by the way, scientific conferences since the age of 20, and what would happen is these scientists would put up these complicated graphs. Thank goodness Dr. Joss did not do that. He made it crystal clear what he was talking about, but they would put up these graphs, and almost no one in the audience understood it. The scientists were so enthused about their work, they didn't realize most of the audience didn't understand this. So what I'm going to do with this animated graph is show you a lipid nanoparticle that is encoded with those OSK genes. These are the Yamanaka factors that have reversed aging in the test tube and reversed aging systemically in mice in a major way. What we do is we encode the lipid nanoparticle with mRNA OSK to enable it to get into our cells. We have to deliver it through the cell membrane so it can get into our cells and then release the mRNA OSK Yamanaka factors, which then release the OSK. This is what we want to get into our DNA, the OSK, into our cells, into our nucleus, which is where our chromosomes and DNA are stored, and then literally deliver OSK gene expression into our DNA so that we can reverse aging the same way as has been done in live mice, old mice growing biologically younger. We're going to try this in old monkeys, and we hope within 2 years people will be able to take these types of therapies. And again, the lipid nanoparticle enables the OSK to be absorbed into the cell, and then different delivery vehicles enable the OSK to get into our DNA and literally make alterations that could theoretically enable us to grow as young as we want and probably treat a lot of negative diseases. So I put this together last night, and I hope it explains a little bit about what's being done. And what's amazing is this technology exists. Most people don't realize how far advanced molecular biology is at this stage, and they can do pretty much whatever they want. We've got 5 different ways of doing this. We're going to try this in some live monkeys very soon, and if we start seeing age reversal, we will increase the OSK payload. We want to give them as much as we can give them to see how much we can reverse their biological aging process. Now, while we were designing these studies, a group in Germany, they developed an improved Yamanaka factor cocktail. They created an OSK in which the OCT4 and the SOX2 were put together, and they were able to get greater benefits with the SOX2 OCT4 dimer. This was January 2024 that they published this. they were able to show improvements over the Yamanaka factors that were used earlier. And we are studying this right now in mice to see if they really do work better. And the reason I'm showing you this is when you think about the fact Yamanaka factors were discovered in 2006, and they've advanced from cells into in vivo models, and now people are saying, well, that's great, we can make it better, which is great news for us. But here's what's really incredible. Sam Altman, ChatGPT founder, he's put a huge amount of money into an age reversal company, as has Jeff Bezos and many, many other billionaires. And he has developed something, and we're going to explore this more next service, in which 2 of the Yamanaka factors were made 50 times more effective. So before we even prove OSK may reverse systemic aging in older monkeys and people, we've already got researchers saying, let's improve the Yamanaka factors to induce an even greater age reversal benefit. That's how fast this science is moving forward. January 17th, 2025, when this was talked about, and the slide before was January 2024, we're seeing an exponential increase in what's happening on the scientific front. So what can we do right now to not die? As Brian Johnson says on his t-shirt, don't die. We don't want to do that. Well, thymosin alpha-1 is a peptide secreted by our thymus gland. And as many of us realize, as we grow through puberty, through that stage, our thymus gland shrivels to the point we no longer make thymosin alpha-1. And I personally suffer from a genetic immune senescent disorder, and I've had to undergo a lot of therapies, and my levels of certain immune cells started to drop so low, frankly, I was afraid I was going to die. So I was able to get my hands on some thymosin alpha-1. I did an aggressive self-experiment, and the preliminary results, I'll give you the final results next service, in writing the final results, every immune function that we looked at, which is probably 60 different immune cell subsets. This is a very expensive immune risk profile test. Dr. Mahara talked about that a little bit in a service a couple months ago. But here I was looking like someone on death's door from a standpoint of weakened immune function. Every marker improved in response to injecting the thymosin alpha-1. This is not a pill, this is an injection, and cancer patients use it 2 or 3 times a week. I was using it 6 times a week to see if it would induce a robust effect. And why am I doing that? Well, the benefits. These are the immune-enhancing benefits that this one peptide from the thymus gland, and there are others, but just this one, activates all of these beneficial immune functions. And as we grow older, unfortunately, immune senescence takes away. It takes away all of these benefits that protect us while we're alive. So here we have something that in 1981, there was solid published data indicating this should be available at least to cancer patients, maybe hepatitis patients. Here we are 44 years later, American doctors don't even know about it. And it's used in other countries, as usual, drugs in other countries available, but not here in the United States. But in recent years, the evidence has been accumulating that thymosin alpha-1 might enable people with sepsis to survive. 300,000 people a year die of sepsis in the United States. If thymosin alpha-1 was available, many of them could be saved. And then as it relates to cancer, now that they have the checkpoint inhibitors, the CAR-T therapies, to take away the ability of cancer cells to deflect an immune attack, well, you've got to have an immune system then to kill the cancer cells. Typical older person has immune senescence. You know, the other parts of the body is growing senescent, and your immune system is also. So what if we have access to thymosin alpha-1 and then treat the patient with the Keytruda, the Opdivo, the Yervoy, the checkpoint inhibitors, the CAR-T therapy, and then add in the radiation, chemo, and other therapies, we might be able to save a lot of cancer patients' lives. Look at 2019, 2020, 2022. These are scientists writing about the fact that thymosin alpha-1 looks like something that should have been approved 40 years ago, and now it's looking like it may be even more effective as an adjuvant cancer treatment. Not working by itself to cure cancer, but if you're going to go under an aggressive chemotherapy, aggressive checkpoint inhibitor, this might be a drug you might want to use before or during the therapy to improve your odds of surviving by boosting your overall immune function. And this study talked about the fact FDA restricting Americans' access to it. Maybe they got it wrong. Maybe it's time to move this technology forward so anyone with cancer has the option of utilizing thymosin alpha-1. Again, this is an injectable drug We don't sell it or anything, but it's available in other countries, and there are people in this country working on trying to make it available, including me. And if I get my final results back and I see these dramatic improvements in myself and a few others that are self-experimenting, we're going to be rather hardcore activists as related to pushing the FDA to allow Americans to gain access to this drug, because we want all 8 of those immune benefits in our body to occur. As we're growing older, we lose all of that. Thymosin alpha-1 can help restore a lot of it. And there are other thymosins, by the way. It's thymosin alpha-1, there's thymulin, there's thymosin beta-4. There are other thymosin peptides also, but this thymosin alpha-1 seems to be the most effective and the one we want to use. So again, the data substantiating it back in 1981, it was rather conclusive, and we're still here waiting for it to get approved in the United States. This is a tragedy. We're working to try to undo the tragedy as much as we can by saving people's lives today. So our objective is to live for an indefinite period of time. Media talking about it a lot. What can we do to move our lifespan, move our longevity into the future? Well, it's what you heard about with the first doctor, Dr. Josh, and what I talked about is we've got to avoid the toxic foods. We literally are killing ourselves with unhealthy lifestyle practices, and if we are able to stop or avoid what you see in this screen, you're going to improve your odds of living a long time. And some of the foods that are turning out to confer longevity, this is what you want to put into your diet more and more. Take out the garbage, take more of these into your body, and you may live a lot longer than what nature instilled in your body. A lot more than, unfortunately, what people following a typical American lifestyle are doing. Now, Bernie Marcus lived in Boca Raton, and I did a podcast with him right during the COVID era. And he seriously wanted to put money into aging research. But during the COVID era, everyone was isolating, nothing we could really do about it. And he died on us November 5th, 2024. And that's regrettable. Very charitable individual, wanted to do something about aging, and just the bad timing. And I always regret that when you lose an opportunity. The opportunities have just exponentially grown. Our ability to potentially put aging in reverse, and that would probably enable our degenerative illnesses to potentially disappear. That is the mission of this church, and that is my talk. I'd like to update people very briefly, and yeah, I'll be happy to answer some questions.
Any questions for Bill here?
When we're talking about processed red meat, how about grass-fed organic?
Yeah, I've heard about the grass-fed beef that people eat. It's high in the omega-3 acids. And I just don't know if there's enough data to show that eating that kind of meat will not create an increased risk of dementia. I don't know the answer. So what I'm doing is, as much as I would love to eat a big steak almost every night, I don't. I just don't do what might cause me to develop Alzheimer's and other degenerative diseases. So I've heard that for the last 10, 15 years. It may be accurate. Well, I understand, but there may be other components of red meat, and certainly the ultra-processed red meat. I mean, you don't want to touch that. But nonetheless, the grass-fed beef, I know people eat it, and they hope it won't kill them. I don't know if it will.
Here's a question back here, Bill.
Does pancreatic enzymes have any effects on cancer?
Does pancreatic enzymes? Well,
high levels of
there was a doctor who, unfortunately, he died of a heart attack around the age of 66. He promoted high doses of pancreatic enzymes to treat cancer. I don't know if they worked. I just don't know if they did. He certainly promoted them widely. He wrote a lot of books on them. And I haven't seen the kind of data that we need to substantiate that type of claim.
Here's a question over here, Bill.
Well, it's not a question, it's a comment. Everybody mentions here about eating meat. Nobody eats meat. You eat cadavers if you do eat meat, okay? And there's a science, it's called the synthesis of cadaverine and putrescine. Look it up. You know, there's two amino acids, one of easy breaking and one of difficult. How do you want to put it for your body? Easy or difficult?
Good point. Yes, we're eating carcasses, yes. We're trying not to.
The request back here was for the slide for the foods to avoid, and those are the foods to avoid that were in the slide earlier. Peter, you have a question for Bill.
Here's your slide.
Hi, Bill. Is the microphone working? Okay, good. Hey, so the thymus and the thyroid depend on iodine. And here in Florida, we sweat it out. And in fact, there's an iodine, everybody's deficient in iodine. And so I was coughing every time I went from hot to cold here in Florida. And my doctor says, oh, you're probably iodine deficient. That's what happened for me when I came from New York, or you when you came from Pittsburgh. And so I just started adding iodine. The cough, the sneeze went away. Iodine raises your immune function. It also raises your brain function, and it also makes you grow more hair.
Well, I concur that iodine is a good supplement for most people. However, the thymus gland, it shrivels beginning at puberty. This is the scary part. And at age 65 to 70, there's virtually none of it left. So the iodine is not going to rescue a shriveled up thymus gland. What will rescue it potentially, Dr. Greg Fahey, who we support, a growth hormone, DHEA, and melatonin. He has regenerated the thymus gland in older people with his research. That's been published. That was the first case of a human trial in which aging went reversed about 2.5 years. So you can regrow your thymus gland if you start under age 70 or 75 with growth hormone, DHEA, and melatonin. But iodine, unfortunately, is not going to help.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Bill Faloon.
Thank you.
As with Dr. Josh, I see some of you have more questions, and Bill will be around here after the event so that he'll be able to meet with you and talk with you personally. Our next speaker is the founder of the Biohacker Expo in Miami. And that's next month, by the way, just only a month away. Sandy's been biohacking now for 4 years to heal a brain injury, perhaps longer even. Is that about right? She spent $97,000 in the first year and more since trying to recover, and in hindsight, could have recovered at a tiny fraction if she only knew then what she has since learned. Her symptoms started with fatigue and a brain fog topped with depression, and knew it was something deeper. So she kept digging until she figured it out, and credits Dave Asprey, who shared his story about his exposure to mold, as her doctors didn't even consider it. Sandy says that biohacking is all about personalization and freedom to explore, and she wants you to feel empowered to trust your intuition about your own well-being. Let's welcome Sandy and hear more about biohacking. Sandy Martin.
Thank you, Neil. Hi, everyone. I was here a year ago. I don't know how many were here and I met a year ago. It's good to see your faces again. I look at biohacking differently than most people. Most people think of it as something where you're manipulating something outside of your body or inside of your body to optimize performance, and there are ways to do that for sure. But what's most important is to stop things that are harming our bodies. And is this the clicker? That works. I'm going to start with a story from 2 weeks ago. That's my cousin, Brian. And he called me and he asked me if I thought he should take lion's mane to reverse some brain fog. And I said, Brian, I think you should stop eating McDonald's first. And this is him 2 weeks later. He posted on social media. He lost 16 pounds. And so nothing makes me happier than when somebody takes healthy advice for themselves. And my presentation today it will just bring forth some simple tips. Nothing here will cost money. It's all designed to help you feel better in your life. So that's a picture of me. That was my first biohacking device when I had mold in my brain but didn't know it. And I started biohacking before I got to the root cause. I like to tell people that biohacking and functional medicine are different because biohacking is about how you feel today. It's about optimizing your performance. That might be mental clarity, it might be energy, but it optimizes how you feel now. And functional medicine is about the past. Why don't you feel good right now? If biohacking isn't helping you now, there's a root cause, and that was my case. Biohacking didn't help me at all until I found out what was wrong. And then functional medicine is also about the future so that we can age gracefully or not age at all. And so that was my first biohacking device. It's called the V-Light, and it puts near-infrared light in the brain and up the nose. And I remember telling my mom how excited I was when I got it, and she said, well, if that works, why doesn't everybody know about it? And then I've learned from people like Bill Faloon that the reason people don't know about it is because we can't talk about this stuff. They can't explicitly say what it does to help drain cerebral spinal fluid and clear out, the tangles and everything in the brain. So I started biohacking because I, out of the blue, just didn't feel good. Started with depression, and then I couldn't read a spreadsheet anymore, which was kind of my jam. And then I couldn't go through a task list. And then everybody who worked for me was faster than me at everything I was great at. I was 45. There was a very high risk of getting diagnosed with perimenopause. Just normal aging, right? Like, I'm sure all of you are tired of hearing about normal aging stories. And that's what I was up against. But I knew it happened so suddenly that I went to a neurologist right away. And he did a brain scan that he performed incorrectly and recommended a course of treatment that could have harmed me. I was smart enough to not, and I had support from another doctor who gave me just an inkling to question. If in my experience, if you're up against a powerful voice that you're not sure about, the stronger they try to push you into something is the cue that maybe there's another way. That was my case. And so it took me 6 months, and it was from one of Dave Asprey's books that I was able to identify that mold could be a cause. I got tested, found out it was. I was able to detox. I not only got the V-Light device, I also got a hyperbaric oxygen chamber. I bought a 1.5 ATA hard shell oxygen chamber because it wasn't that much more than going for the 80 treatments that was recommended for me. But it gave me headaches because I had mold in my brain. And mold fights back. Like, mold isn't nice. So I spent all of this money based on a doctor's recommendation that didn't do me any good at all. Once I was able to detox, then I got out of the moldy environment, I started to detox. I did very gentle things, chlorella, chia seeds, really just gave my body a fighting chance. And the things that we're going to talk about today, I think, relate back to the first two presentations. They're just so simple. And so I want to explain how we get our bodies to start communicating correctly so that the signals can go where they need to go. And I don't know if anybody has their phone out. If you want to scan the QR code, I'm sure they'll make the presentation available later. There's an article on my website about the 19 biovillains. We're going to talk about 5 of them today. The first thing is BPA and microplastics. And you may see cans at the grocery store that say BPA free. They've got it. They've got BPS. Thank you. So there's always an alternative that does the job of protecting the food from whatever's going to happen to the can, but that protection layer is disrupting our hormones. And it's causing this imbalance that we've talked about earlier. This estrogen imbalance can be caused from the BPAs, from the microplastics, from fragrances. It was only 2 months ago that I realized, because my shampoo smelled so nice, I bought it from Whole Foods, and I just didn't consider that it would also have phthalates, which is another one of these things. I had to throw out my shampoos. But we don't need these kinds of challenges inside our hormonal balance. Pesticides on our crops. This is not news to anyone. But the conveniences of eating out, every time we eat out, we're eating pesticides. Every one of us in here eats out sometime. Maybe a couple of exceptions, but it's common, right? This is also, glyphosate is an estrogen disruptor, and it disrupts the gut microbiome, and all of that makes it harder to clear toxins out of the body. Refined sugars and artificial sweeteners. honey and stevia are nice alternatives if you have to have something sweet. But really indulging with sugar creates inflammation in the body, and it makes it hard to detox and hard for anything to do its job right. Seed oils, they're manufactured with hexane. It's an industrial process that causes our cells to stop being able to send the signals we need. I really believe that there's an energy to our bodies that can flow all of the hormones and all of the molecules, everything we need in all the right places, except we've got a traffic jam. You know, the inflammation causes a backup on I-95, right? Like, we got to clear out this traffic jam if we're going to get the signals where they need to go. Our bodies are designed just before we do anything to live to be 120, 122. That's what we've seen in life. But the average life expectancy is 77. This stuff is the reason why it's 77. Not seed oils alone, but this kind of thing, the biovillains. Mouthwash is terrible for us. If we disrupt the oral microbiome, we're disrupting the ability to produce nitric oxide. And as we've just heard, that can lead to early onset Alzheimer's, among other problems. Here's that QR code again, if anybody's interested. And there are 3 very basic, no-cost ways you can help your body detoxify. Intermittent fasting allows us to fully digest our food. We just give ourselves a break in digestion. This is the theory used to be we should eat 6 small meals a day, but that just keeps us digesting all day long. And now we want to just get a break from digesting every once in a while. Intermittent fasting is the first way. The second way is breath work. Breath work helps to stimulate the flow of lymphatic fluid and helps us to detoxify that way. And also just low impact movement, walking, that can do the same thing. So in addition to saying no to all of those prior things, I want to say yes to NO, yes to nitric oxide. And so the 2 areas of the body where nitric oxide is most easily produced are in the nasal passages. Nasal breathing is critical to the production of nitric oxide, and the endothelial cells around the arteries. And just basic movement will help to get that going. We need nitric oxide to boost our circulation, and better circulation boosts liver function, which helps us detoxify our bodies. This is all the stuff that I needed to know before I used any of the biohacking that really got me all of my cognition back, and to be able to run an event of the size like I run. I have an event in 4 weeks where I'm orchestrating 100 different solutions and 50 speakers and for 1,500 attendees. And it's not an easy task, and I couldn't have done it unless I was able to reverse the cognitive decline I had and get my energy back. So I hope you all are feeling a little adventurous with me right now, because we're going to do 3 Om chants to boost our nitric oxide. Because this is the fastest way I know to be able to improve cognition, calm down, and boost NO all at the same time. So you guys game? You want to Om with me 3 times? We're going to breathe in for 5 seconds and Om out for 5 seconds. Okay, you ready? Okay, breathe in. Om. In. Who feels better? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for that. I feel better too. So there are foods that boost nitric oxide. Beets are number 1 on the list. Even dark chocolate, Swiss chard, watermelon, walnuts. I mean, there are lots of things that do this. I would say just find a list online, and then you'll get some fresh ideas for that. I want to conclude today. There's another QR code that is basically the content of this presentation, and I want to tell you a story about a man I met at RadFest last year in 2023. This man changed my life forever, and his perspective has just shifted everything for me. I was sitting down with a friend of mine, and an older gentleman walked up. He was in his 70s. He was not particularly fit, but he had a pep to his step. He was really happy to be alive. And my friend Dan looked at him and said, "Man, where do you get all that energy? What is it?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm just getting started." And that's what I think of when I think of all of you and the work you're doing and why you're doing it and why you care about topics like this. Every single person in this room believes and can wake up every day believing that you are just getting started. And that is a complete inspiration to me and how I live my life and how I approach every single day. And I just want to thank all of you for bringing that perspective into the world. And thank you for hearing my presentation today.
Sandy Martin. We have time for a few questions. Are there any questions for Sandy?
I have an interest in your mold reaction and what you did in your surroundings to prevent you from reoccurring.
I had to move. And then the house that I moved into, I had to completely renovate also because I'd like to call Florida the moist state rather than the sunshine state. There's mold everywhere here. And so it's a real challenge for sure.
Question for Peter.
One of the best mold detoxing things is boron, and the food with the most boron is plums. Did you
Interesting. I didn't hear that anywhere.
Really good. If you use borax in your laundry, it kills all the mold on your clothes.
Oh, that makes sense. Mm-hmm.
And back here, we have one more question for you. Jerry.
Hi. I guess you're probably a believer in Reiki.
I'm not opposed to Reiki. I do believe that energy is flowing in and around all of us all the time. But I am a believer that anything that we believe in works.
Thank you. Very nice speech again. But did you mention where to get the biohacking device you had on your head?
That was called the V-Light. There are others. I use Cera Thrive right now, C-E-R-A. I don't use the V-Light anymore. I found a new one that I liked, but Cera Thrive is what I use now. Well, it'll be available at my expo. Biohackerexpo.com is the website where you can find more information about me and my story, and also this presentation, and the biovillains are linked from the homepage. But they're also online at CERASarathrive.com.
So Sandy's going to be around if you want to talk with her. She'll be around here for a little while. Let's thank Sandy Martin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done.
Appreciate it.
All right. What a great night. So our next month's service will be February 27th, the last Thursday, as it always is, the last Thursday of the month. And we have Johnny Adams coming in person. So it'll be in person, in Zoom, and YouTube. It'll be the hybrid again. So be sure to be here for that. What you've learned here tonight, and share it with everybody. Next month, bring a friend also. I think there's going to be somebody in your life that you're going to think, maybe they should come to Perpetual Life. Some of you may have thought about cryonics. If you have any interest in cryonics, be sure to see me or any of the cryonics people here. We'll be happy to give you information. We've got a library over here. You can borrow a book for the month. Thanks for coming tonight, and we'll see you again next month.